a world overflowing with noise, notifications buzzing every few minutes, conversations happening faster than thoughts can form, opinions thrown around like arrows, most people have forgotten what it means to be truly alone. Not just physically alone, but mentally alone, undistracted, unpulled, unshaken. Yet history offers us a figure who embraced solitude not as an escape, but as a source of unimaginable power. Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated samurai, spent the majority of his life walking a path few dared to take, the path of aloneness. He believed that solitude was not a burden, it was a weapon. And in that silence, he carved out a level of mastery the world still talks about centuries later. But what did he find in solitude that others could not? Why does the world fear the very thing Musashi considered essential? And how does walking alone transform a person into someone sharper, calmer, wiser, and unshakably resilient? These are the questions that lead us into the heart of Musashi's final work, Dokkodo, a collection of 21 principles he wrote just 1 week before his death. Not for glory, not for students, but as a guide for anyone who seeks clarity in a chaotic world, strength in a fragile world, and meaning in a world that tells you to keep chasing everything except yourself. If reflections like this resonate with you, deep philosophy, ancient wisdom applied to modern life, consider subscribing to this channel. Here, we explore the kind of ideas that don't just motivate you for a moment, but rewire the way you think. Now, let's step into Musashi's world. He was born in a Japan drowned in war. Lords fought for territory. Samurai fought for honor. Farmers fought simply to survive another season. Violence was not an event. It was the backdrop of life. Yet Musashi was not raised in the traditional lifestyle of a samurai bound to a master. He became a ronin, a samurai without a lord, walking the land with no attachments, no obligations, and often no companions. He fought over 60 duels, many of them to the death. Yet none of them defined him as much as the moments when he was alone. People remembered his victories. Musashi remembered the silence between them, because that was where his growth happened. To him, solitude was not isolation. It was clarity. It was the absence of unnecessary influence, the absence of noise, the absence of emotional clutter. Musashi understood that a person's worst confusions do not come from the world. They come from the world inside their mind. And unless one learns to sit with themselves, without distraction, without escape, without running to the next source of stimulation, they will never truly understand who they are or what they are capable of becoming. He wrote, "Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world." This single line captures the essence of his solitude. Most people today think heavily of themselves, constantly comparing, defending, doubting, performing, seeking approval. And because of that weight, they cannot think deeply of anything else. Their minds are too occupied with themselves to perceive the vast, intricate world around them. Musashi reversed the equation. Make yourself light, humble, quiet, and suddenly the world becomes enormous, fascinating, and full of lessons. He wandered alone because solitude purified his attention. It stripped away distractions. It exposed the parts of himself he needed to confront. It forced him to meet his own weaknesses without the comfort of excuses. And in that confrontation, he found strength. Imagine walking across a field at dawn. No sounds except wind brushing through tall grass. Imagine sitting beside a cold river with nothing but your thoughts as company. Imagine practicing sword strikes against the morning air, hearing only the echo of your breath. In these moments, there is nowhere to hide from yourself. That is why Musashi valued solitude, not because it made life easier, because it made life honest. But Musashi's solitude was not passive. He didn't retreat from the world. He walked through it with intention. He observed people, landscapes, movement, seasons, and patterns of behavior. In solitude, his senses sharpened. He learned to detect the smallest shifts, a slight change in wind direction, a tremor in someone's voice, the instability in an opponent's stance. Solitude became a teacher. Every silence carried information. Every stillness revealed truth. Today, we fill silence as quickly as it appears. We fear our own thoughts. We fear going a day without noise, entertainment, or validation. But Musashi sought those silent spaces because they forced his mind to strengthen itself. When you stop drowning your thoughts with external noise, the inner world begins to speak. Your instincts sharpen. Your anxieties reveal their roots. Your desires become clearer. Your fears become identifiable instead of overwhelming. Solitude is not empty. It is full of the answers you've been avoiding. Musashi's teachings remind us that solitude is not about escaping others. It is about returning to yourself. Modern life constantly tears your attention away from you. The world tells you what to want, how to think, what to fear, who to follow. But in solitude, all of that fades and the truth remains. Your truth, not the world's version of it. That is why Musashi wrote Dokkodo, to preserve the wisdom gained through decades of walking alone. One of his principles says, "Do not seek pleasure for its own sake." Not because pleasure is wrong, but because dependency is. When happiness comes only from outside sources, it can be taken away at any moment. But when satisfaction comes from your own discipline, your own growth, your own path, it becomes unbreakable. He taught that desire, when uncontrolled, creates suffering. The constant yearning for more leads to endless dissatisfaction. Musashi believed that freedom comes from needing little, wanting little, and focusing on what truly matters. Solitude helps you see what is unnecessary. When you remove noise, you begin to see how many things you cling to that do not deserve a place in your life. Old habits, old fears, old possessions, old relationships. He wrote, "Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need." But he didn't just mean physical objects. He meant mental ones too. Solitude is a cleansing fire. It burns away the layers that don't belong to you. It reveals what is authentic beneath the surface. Another principle states, "Do not rely on a partial feeling." Musashi understood the danger of acting impulsively based on temporary emotions. Feelings change. Truth does not. In solitude, emotions settle. The mind becomes clear. You begin to make decisions based not on panic or anxiety or ego, but on insight. Solitude creates distance between you and your reactions. And that distance is where wisdom lives. But solitude isn't always easy. At first, it confronts you with discomfort. The discomfort of hearing your own thoughts. The discomfort of acknowledging places you've failed. The discomfort of realizing how much of your life has been shaped by external influence. Most people run from this discomfort. Musashi walked straight into it. He understood that true strength comes from standing alone, not because you reject others, but because you do not fear yourself. In his final days, he wrote, "Do not fear death." This wasn't a call to recklessness. It was a call to live fully. People who fear death fear life too. They hesitate. They hold back. They never leap into opportunity. They cling to safety instead of growth. Solitude teaches you to confront your mortality honestly. When you do, you stop waiting for perfect conditions. You start making the most of the time you have. Musashi's solitude prepared him for everything: battlefields, uncertainty, aging, loss, and ultimately the end of his own life. But most importantly, it prepared him for himself. And now we bring this ancient teaching into a modern world. Today, solitude is rare. We are constantly connected, constantly stimulated, constantly comparing our lives to others. Technology gives us endless connection, but at the cost of connection with ourselves. That is why Musashi's wisdom feels even more urgent now than it did centuries ago. To practice solitude today, you don't have to abandon society or wander as a ronin. You simply need to reclaim small pockets of silence. Set aside a few minutes each day where no one else can reach you. Turn off your devices. Take a walk without headphones. Sit with your thoughts. Let the silence speak. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. That is a sign you need it. Over time, you begin to crave it. You begin to feel stronger, calmer, sharper. You begin to recognize your own voice instead of the voices around you. Musashi believed that solitude is not the absence of people, it is the presence of the self. And when you truly meet yourself, without distraction, the world changes. As we continue tracing the silent footsteps of Musashi's life, the deeper layers of solitude reveal themselves, not as a retreat from the world, but as a return to one's unshakable center. People often imagine solitude as emptiness, a barren landscape where nothing happens. But to Musashi, solitude was the richest ground a human being could cultivate. In it, he grew discipline, clarity, and mastery. In it, he saw his own mind without distortion. In it, he discovered which thoughts were truly his and which thoughts had been placed there by the world. One of the most profound lessons he left behind is the understanding that solitude is not antisocial. It is anti-distraction. Most people today have never experienced true solitude, even if they live alone. Their minds are constantly occupied, scrolling, comparing, watching, escaping. They are alone physically, but never alone mentally. Musashi teaches the opposite. Solitude begins not when people leave, but when noise leaves. A person surrounded by crowds, but anchored in themselves, is more alone, with purpose, than someone isolated but drowning in inner chaos. This raises a powerful question. What would your life look like if your mind were not filled with the voices of others? What decisions would you make if you weren't influenced by meaninglessness, expectation, and comparison? What dreams would you pursue if you didn't fear judgment? Solitude strips away the filters. It exposes the truth of who you are beneath the layers of habit, fear, and social conditioning. Musashi's precepts guide us toward this honesty. Do not act on an incomplete feeling, he says, urging us to avoid letting temporary emotions drive permanent choices. When we live reactively, we live blindly. But solitude creates reflection. Reflection creates awareness. Awareness creates wisdom. And wisdom creates a life that feels intentional instead of accidental. Yet Musashi also warns that solitude demands courage. It forces you to stand eye to eye with your disappointments and confront the parts of yourself that you avoid through busyness. When you are alone, there is no one to blame. There is only what is. This level of honesty can feel uncomfortable, even painful, but it is also liberating. Many people never heal because they never stop long enough to hear what needs healing. They never grow because they never stop running. Solitude stops the running. From the quiet mountains where Musashi trained to the thick forests where he meditated, every moment of aloneness changed him. He learned to observe without rushing. He learned to choose without pressure. He learned to act without ego. He learned to detach without losing compassion. Solitude taught him the most powerful skill a human can possess, the ability to be whole within oneself, without needing the world to fill the gaps. And then there is the principle that many people misunderstand. Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need. Musashi was not preaching poverty. He was preaching clarity. Every object you keep owns a part of your attention. Every relationship you cling to owns a part of your emotional energy. Every outdated belief you refuse to release becomes a mental burden you carry. Solitude helps you see which attachments add meaning and which only add weight. When you begin to release the unnecessary, you discover how much strength you were using to carry what should have been put down long ago. Musashi walked away from many things: comfort, approval, prestige, possessions. Not because he was rejecting the world, but because he was choosing himself. He chose mastery over distraction, purpose over comfort, truth over validation. That is why his mind was sharp enough to win 60 duels, and more importantly, to win the silent duel within himself. In our modern world, detachment does not mean abandoning relationships or ambitions. It means not allowing them to own your identity. Musashi cherished discipline because it gave him internal freedom. The less he depended on the world, the more powerful he became in navigating it. Detachment is not coldness, it is independence. It is the refusal to let external forces dictate your inner state. Another of Musashi's precepts says, "Do not fear death." At first, this seems harsh or extreme, but his meaning is deeper. Do not fear the natural cycle of life. Do not fear endings, transitions, uncertainty. When you fear losing, you hesitate. When you fear change, you cling. When you fear mortality, you never truly live. Solitude helps dissolve this fear because it puts you in touch with the temporary nature of everything. Every moment alone is a reminder that life is both fragile and miraculous. And when you embrace this duality, you stop wasting time. You stop waiting. You start moving, intentionally, boldly, peacefully. Musashi walked alone, not because he rejected companionship, but because he did not want companionship to become a shield. Many people use others to avoid facing themselves. Musashi allowed no such escape. His aloneness made him strong enough to connect authentically when he chose to. And that reveals another surprising truth. Solitude does not weaken relationships, it strengthens them. When you know yourself deeply, you bring clarity into your connections. You communicate with honesty. You choose people without neediness. You love without fear of loss. You are no longer half of a person looking for another half. You are whole, choosing to walk beside someone, not behind, not ahead, and not instead of yourself. This mindset transforms not only how you relate to others, but how you relate to life. When you have learned to be alone, nothing can control you. Not rejection, not approval, not abandonment, not silence. The world becomes lighter because your grounding comes from within. Musashi mastered solitude so thoroughly that no external force could shake his inner structure. That is why he wrote Dokkodo at the very end of his life, to pass on the blueprint of internal freedom. If we bring Musashi's philosophy into the modern world, we find that solitude is not a retreat from obligation, but a return to equilibrium. It is time spent listening to the inner voice that gets drowned in noise. It is time spent reconnecting with purpose, intention, and clarity. People who fear solitude often fear the truths it will reveal. But those who embrace it unlock a strength that cannot be taken away. The world's loudest distractions lose their power. The chaos loses its grip. Solitude becomes a sanctuary where the mind rests, heals, sharpens, and prepares. And this brings us to an important realization. Solitude is not something you stumble into. It is something you choose. A deliberate act, a conscious decision. Whether it is 10 minutes in the morning, or an hour of walking without your phone, or simply closing your eyes and breathing intentionally, solitude is not measured in distance from others, but in distance from noise. And the more you practice it, the more life changes. You begin to understand your thoughts instead of drowning in them. You begin to see your patterns instead of repeating them. You begin to respond instead of react. By the time Musashi wrote his final 21 principles, he had distilled solitude into a way of living. Not lonely, not disconnected, but inwardly anchored, fearless, whole. And as you internalize these ideas, you might feel a shift, a sense that solitude is not something to avoid, but something to value, something sacred, something necessary for anyone who seeks strength beyond the surface of life. If this journey resonates with you, if Musashi's wisdom opens something deep within you, consider subscribing so you can continue exploring ideas that help you grow stronger, calmer, and more intentional in a world that rarely encourages such stillness. Musashi's greatest legacy is not the duels he won or the legend he became. It is the reminder that a person who can walk alone is a person who can walk anywhere. Solitude does not make you smaller, it expands you. It reveals your edges and your depth. It builds a fortress within that no one else can damage. When you learn to be alone, you learn who you are. When you learn who you are, you become unshakable. In the end, solitude is not a punishment. It is a power. It is the place where you stop surviving and start becoming. Where you stop following and start leading. Where you stop fearing silence and start listening to what your soul has been trying to tell you all along. And as Musashi discovered, when you finally learn to walk alone, you realize you were never truly alone. You were simply meeting the strongest version of yourself for the very first time.